As necessary as it is for us to be in the church with other church people, singing church songs, reading from church books, we often find ourselves outside, we being Christians. And God intended it to be that way. My name is Keith LaShawn Garrett, and today I'd like to talk about evangelism. What is evangelism? Evangelism is a fancy word, indeed it's a biblical word, but it deals with Christians sharing their faith to those who may not really necessarily understand the faith of Christ. Christians talking about Jesus Christ in ways that by His grace are made relevant. But most discussions on evangelism oftentimes deal with people having to go do something. As a matter of fact, I was once talking to a gentleman right before I was getting ready to teach a class on evangelism. And I asked him this question. I said, suppose you were to show up at church one Sunday, and in the bulletin it said, evangelism meeting room 101 directly after church. I asked him, would you go? He thought for a while, and he said, I probably wouldn't go because they would probably ask me to go do something. And I think that's the way evangelism is often seen. It's seen as us being pushed into doing something. But truthfully, evangelism is not necessarily that. What I'm saying is God is not primarily a task-oriented God. God is more about our being, and as a result of our being, doing flows out of that. For example, one of the most evangelistic passages is Jesus in John 3:16. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. And that deals with primarily who we are. We're believers. That's our reality. Or even Jesus talking in Luke 9:23. If anyone is to come after me or follow me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. And although we're doing something, we're following Him, we can only follow Him because of who we are. We are followers of Jesus Christ. And that indeed is what I really want to discuss with you today. Jesus said in Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. So there's no glorifying by people, and there is no works unless there's this shine, unless your reality is that you are one who's been given the capacity by God's grace to shine. And that's what we're talking about, evangelism. You being you. You acting the way God would have you to act. So what we're talking about is your being, not necessarily your doing. We're not wanting to engender fear, as I think I did with the gentleman that I referred to earlier. We're talking about you just being what God would have you to be. You've been gifted. You've been equipped. You have the Spirit of God, if indeed you belong to Him. And you have the ability to be and do everything that He would have you to be and do, just by being that child of God. And the world is better for it. But what does it look like when the church is not being the church? When the people who have been called by God to be luminaries, to be sensitive to Him, to be responsive to Him. What does it look like when we're not that? The example is in Matthew 17. Jesus comes down from the Mount of Transfiguration, and there's a ruckus, and a man had brought his son to the disciples because this boy has been demon-possessed. And the man runs up to Jesus and says, my son is throwing himself down into the water. He throws himself down into the fire, and I brought him to your disciples, but, and I'm paraphrasing, they were useless. They were not able to cast it out. And Jesus made quick work of that and cast out the demon. But later the disciples came to Jesus and said, why couldn't we be effective? And Jesus told them, in essence, there was a disconnect in your faith. A disconnect between you and the Father, the Spirit, me. There was something happening in you that was not enabling you to be fruitful. And that can happen to us. It can mean for us that we are not being what we've been called to be, what we've been changed to be because of something in us. What I really want us to do today is reason together. I'm going to go through a passage in the book of Acts. We're going to stop the CD and allow you to meet with people in a group and talk about things that I kind of prompt you to talk about. And ultimately, at the end of this time, I'm hoping and praying that at very least you'll have greater understanding into evangelism. But I'm also hoping that your walk with Christ will be more fruitful as you and your group or your team of other believers work through the issues of evangelism. So it's arguable that the foundation of evangelism is not us going out to do something and us being successful, if I can use that word, because only God defines success. The foundation of evangelism is us just being who He has called us to be. We've tried to deal with that. And there's a great example in the book of Acts of a man who was just being. And first, you'll find that he was being sensitive to God. Sensitive to God as God spoke through His Spirit. Sensitive to God as God spoke through the angel of the Lord. His name is Philip. And I'm in Acts chapter 8. And feel free to just listen in or feel free to go to this passage in Acts chapter 8, beginning at verse 26. As I read. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Rise and go toward the south, to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. This is desert place." And he rose and went. And there was an Ethiopian, a eunuch, a court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who was in charge of all of her treasure. He come to Jerusalem to worship, and was returning, seated in his chariot. And he was reading from the prophet Isaiah. And the Spirit said to Philip, "Go over and join the chariot." So Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet. Now, I'm going to stop there for a moment because I want you to see something that is subtle, but it is so significant for our purposes. Philip is doing, but Philip is only doing as he is sensitive. Look again, verse 26. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Rise and go toward the south." And I think that as I think about God and His activity among us, I think that God is always active. As a matter of fact, there is never a time when He is not active. There's never a time when He is not communicating with us, holding us, moving with us, inspiring us, keeping us, loving us. It's more probable that we're not sensitive to Him if we don't sense that. But Philip heard. So when the angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Rise and go," don't lose the fact that Philip heard. When you move down to verse 29, and it says, "And the Spirit said to Philip, go," and Philip went. Don't lose the fact that he heard the Spirit. And not only that, when he got there, he didn't begin to speak, right? He didn't just start doing. Look at verse 30 again. So Philip ran to him and heard him. So the whole time, Philip is just sensitive. He's listening. He's open. He's not necessarily wanting to go open his mouth and just talk. He's wanting to wait. He's needing God to move. He's needing God to have His way because God is indeed the author of evangelism. Evangelism is not you and I going to make it happen. Evangelism is you and I being sensitive because God is going to have His way. And whatever is going to happen as a result of His will. And He'll get all the credit for it. I want you and your group to think about that. I want you to ponder this question and talk among yourselves. Is there anything in your life, and maybe not that specific, you may want to talk about what things in general would preclude or prevent someone from being sensitive to the Lord? And I can give you a whole lot of hints. But I think as you sit together and talk and reason and pray, things may come to mind. Again, the question, what can happen in the life of a Christian, be it you or any believer, that can keep them from being sensitive to what God is saying, what God is speaking through His prophets or His apostles, what God may be speaking through preachers or other Christians? A Christian can be disabled from hearing. He can still be a Christian, he just may not be able to hear the signs, the signals, and the sounds of God and others. Now that we've laid somewhat of a foundation of evangelism, I want to talk specifically about SOULS evangelism. It's a method. It's specifically described as S.O.U.L.S, acronym, the signs, the signals, and the sounds of God and others, creating an O, opportunity, to bring about a U, understanding of the love of God, L, that might lead to salvation. And we've talked about the S's. We've talked about Philip's being sensitive to the sounds, the sound of the angel of the Lord, the sound of the Holy Spirit, the sound of this eunuch reading from the Bible, not running to go do something, but willing to be sensitive to what God is doing and what people are doing around him. And it's not a very difficult concept. See, when I use the word sign, I'm talking about something that I can see. For example, if someone's wearing a t-shirt, and I'm being demonstrative, but a t-shirt that says, "I hate life," for lack of a better word, that might be an opportunity, for us to go up to them and say, "Why do you hate life?" Which may lead to an opportunity to discuss God. Or a signal can be a flat tire and someone motioning you over to come and help them. That may lead to an opportunity. Signs, signals, and sounds. A sound may be something that you overhear that might lead to an opportunity to have a discussion. Because you and I might find that the O is so difficult at times to get into. It's hard to be invited into the O, the opportunity. It wasn't very hard for Philip as we return back to Acts chapter 8, looking at verse 30 again. So Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet and asked, "Do you understand what you're reading?" Verse 31. And he said to him, "How can I unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip up into the chariot. See, O's can sometimes feel as shut off or closed as this door. And not only this door, but I'm surrounded by homes, and therefore I'm surrounded by doors. And if I were to walk up and down this street, I'm inclined to believe that just as I stand, not knowing anyone, all things being equal, I'm not readily invited in. I just can't show up and open the door and walk in and sit down. And in Christianity, sometimes we feel the same way. Maybe with people we work with, people we work out with, people that we live with, even own family members. You may feel as though you don't often have an opportunity to share your faith. That sounds like a discussion point. It sounds like something we should really give some thought to. But here's what I want you to talk about instead in your group. How many opportunities can you remember? And perhaps you didn't know there were opportunities. Maybe there were things that you experienced today, yesterday, the day before. And as you look back at them, you might think, wow, that was that was an opportunity. I just didn't catch it. I didn't get it. I feel like I have dozens of them all the time. So as we pause the tape, in your group, either talk about opportunities you missed or consider opportunities that you might have in the future, even present opportunities. So we're dealing with the SOULS method of evangelism, S-O-U-L-S. The signs, signals, and sounds of God and others create an opportunity to bring about an understanding of the love of God that might lead to salvation. Understanding, which is where we are right now, seems pretty significant when it comes from going from not knowing to knowing. Because it's deep within our faith that we love Christ because we know Christ. The Bible is full of those types of examples. Christ himself said to a sinner, "Depart from me, I never knew you." So knowing is paramount. It seems to be the case right here. In Acts 8 again, beginning at verse 30. So Philip ran over to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet and asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" And he said, "How can I unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip up into his chariot. Just think about that. This man, this eunuch, this person was given such insight, even as he was reasoning through Isaiah himself, trying to gain understanding. He felt as though he needed a believer. He needed someone who knew exactly what was going on. But how much understanding do we need to be able to trust Christ? Do we have to be scholars? Do we have to read all of these books and spend so much time as a PhD would researching all the things of God? No, that's not it at all. God is more than capable of giving us everything that we need in order to understand what he would have us to understand about his son. And there are people in your life, there are people in your home, there are people in your sphere of influence who have opinions about God or Jesus Christ, and they may even have these catchphrases. They've been taught certain things. They've been told things about God, and for one reason or another, they chose to believe them. But I'm convinced that if people truly understood the amazing life that he lived, the amazing being that he was and indeed is, if they understood what God would have them to know about Jesus. This may not be theologically sound. I may not be able to prove it biblically, but I just believe they would love him. I believe they would. I'm going to ask you to stop the CD again. And within your groups, I want you to discuss understanding. This may seem more like a theological exercise than the previous lessons were. But what do you think within your group is paramount? What is important? What is necessary for people to be able to trust Christ? Let me give you an example. They must have some knowledge of the Bible. They must have some knowledge of the identity of Jesus Christ. Right? Jesus said himself, "Who do men say that I am?" To translate that loosely, what do people understand about me? Some said he was John the Baptist. Some said he was a prophet. But whatever they thought, Jesus thought understanding was significant. Philip believed understanding was significant. The eunuch certainly believed understanding was very important. And so it is with us. The people in our lives must understand. SOULS Evangelism. The signs, signals, and sounds of God create an O opportunity to bring about the U understanding of the love of God. The love of God. What does that mean? The love of the world is one thing. The love of God is completely something else. I can't say that I can define either one. But Jesus made the distinction with regard to peace. He said, "My peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives it do I give it to you." So if there's a distinction between God's peace and the world's peace, how much more love? Paul deals with love in Corinthians. The psalmists deal with love. But what is godly love? Well, at very least, we can say that godly love is of God. And in this passage, in Acts chapter 8, we left off with Philip the evangelist being invited up into the chariot of the eunuch to talk about the passage in Isaiah 53. And in Acts 8:35, it says that beginning with that passage, Philip began to explain to him the good news, the gospel. Where have we heard that before? God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Loved the world, so he gave his son. That is the gospel. Love it must be linked to the idea of God restoring fellowship between God and man. As we talked about understanding a few minutes ago, how people don't know God because there's sin. We didn't go into great detail with that. But we would say they don't love God because they don't know God. They don't love Christ because they don't know Christ. As understanding grows, as God opens their hearts and their mind, he engenders an opportunity for love between themselves and God that the world just can't do. But we cannot push love on people. And love is the type of thing that can only be experienced. Quick testimony. I got saved when I was 26, born again. And as I was reading through the Bible, something began to change in my heart. I began to fall in love with Jesus Christ. Every ambition, every hope, every desire, everything that I wanted in life began to change. And he became more important, more powerful to me, more amazing, more beautiful, more necessary than anything ever has in my life. Love. Here's what I'd like for you all to discuss in your small groups. With open Bibles, if you have them, I invite you to talk about godly love, what it looks like. Talk about how love is expressed. And also realize that love is ultimately seen through us. Is that difficult? What are barriers in your life to dealing with the issue of love? It's a lot of stuff. I'm sure you all can be creative. The signs, signals, and sounds of God and others create opportunities to bring about an understanding of the love of God that might lead to salvation. There was a time, maybe not so much anymore, but there was a time when evangelism was seen as an opportunity to get more notches on one's belt, an opportunity to, if you will, brag about how many people a person saved. There's been a lot of talk about evangelism over the last decade or so. A lot more understanding, I guess, about what is and what isn't evangelism. And truthfully, we can't save anyone. It's always been that way. That's not a new concept. I can't, you can't save anyone, nor should we even try. We shouldn't feel guilty when we don't save someone because we can't save someone. We should not feel compelled to go out and get someone saved or rush them through a decision or make them pray at the end of our conversation or even ask them to pray unless we feel called or sensitive to necessarily do that. No. But what is our responsibility in salvation? Just to be obedient to God. God does use us just as he used Philip. For example, I'm going back to Acts chapter 8, and I'm going to begin reading in verse 36. And as they were going along the road, they came to some water. And the eunuch said, "See, here is water. What prevents me from being baptized?" Now there must be something that's happening in the eunuch's heart at this point, because believers believe in what's called believer's baptism. We don't baptize people unless they have been born again. So something has transitioned, something has happened in this man's life after hearing the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he says, what keeps me or what prevents me? Obviously nothing, because look there at verse 38. And he commanded the chariot to stop. And they both went down into the water, and Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. And when they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord carried Philip away, and the eunuch saw him no more. And he went on his way rejoicing. I think it's safe to say that this man experienced salvation. It's safe to say that God did a miracle in this sinner's life, but he did it through Philip. so it is with us. God intends to work through us, through believers. And he intends to work through us in such a way that people can know eternal life, that people can know the love of God, that people can understand him, that people can be changed, undone, broken, exalted, lifted up, anticipating that mighty and awesome day when Christ returns. But it only happens through us, through believers, by the grace and the will of God. So as I've said before, we can't save them, nor should we try, but he saves through us. In your groups, there's probably nothing to talk about other than God, have your way with us. Prayer seems like an amazing opportunity at this time. And among other things, this is your time and this is your group and you can do as the Lord leads. But I would also invite you to pray. Pray that God would give you, opportunities to bring about an understanding as you're sensitive to him, and that people would come to know him by his grace. First, I want to thank God for this opportunity to talk to you. And I thank you for taking the time to reason with your group and reason with me. This is something that I think can be life-changing for a lot of people in your life, a lot of people in your world. Not only non-believers or those who don't know Christ, but even believers. So I thank you for being courageous enough to come to Room 101, to not feel as though we're going to send you out to go do something, but to be who you really are. And the Holy Spirit is more than capable of using you. May God bless you, and thank you again.